All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We're doing a kind of question and answer format today. We've got some questions to go through. I will cut us off by 2:15 to allow time for your inspections. If we go that long, and if not, we'll just allow more time for Q&A from you all. So thank you for coming today and welcome. My name is Jill Jennings-Golick with the Department of Community Planning and Development for the City of Denver, and I'm going to be moderating the panel today, so asking the questions, but also answering some of them from a zoning neighborhood inspection services perspective. And I will just note, we have a couple of our inspectors here for Q&A for detailed questions if there are some that come up. So with that, why don't I go ahead and kick us off? The first question is going to have an introduction component. All right, so if you would, please tell us about your role, your department's mission, and how long you've been working with the marijuana industry in this role.
Want me to start?
Go ahead.
I'm Scott Prisco, the Engineer, Architect, Director, and Chief Building Official for the City and County of Denver. I've been in Denver for 3 years now. Obviously, marijuana industry started well before that, but I've had the great opportunity to be involved since then. And I think we've been really moving in a great direction with this community and sort of creating a great bridge between that specific group of folks in that community that aren't quite as familiar with the construction industry. We've had special forums and other things to try and create a great relationship, and I think we've definitely mended some fences that might have been there before.
Hi there. My name's Mark Rudolph with the Denver Fire Department, and I'm a fire inspector. So I look at, so the city charter says that the fire department will inspect every commercial occupancy in the city and county of Denver at least once a year. And the fire prevention division inspects specifically those occupancies that are deemed to have a hazardous use or hazardous materials. So that's how we fall to the marijuana inspections. And I think the way I look at my role here as an inspector is my job is mostly communication and education. And my primary goal is to provide information to people like Scott and my chief and my engineers, and take that information as well back to the people I'm regulating. So, go.
Hello, my name is Richard Pruckler. I work with the Denver Department of Public Health and Environment, the Public Health Inspections Division. I lead, along with Sheila Opog here, our cannabis section of public health inspections. Our supervisor, Kara Laveau, I believe is here. She can wave. As the co-lead for cannabis inspections with the Public Health Inspections Division, my role is to help coordinate and oversee everything related to cannabis in our division, as well as train new staff and conduct inspections at dispensaries and marijuana-infused product manufacturers. Our goal is to implement our department mission, which is to empower Denver's communities to live better and live longer. And as I would like to echo what Mark said, a primary function of my position with the city is education and communication with industry and consumers. I started working with the city in January 2014, so lucky me. I have been able to watch the cannabis industry evolve and grow, and yeah, that's me. Thanks.
All right, I'll finish up. So as I mentioned, I'm Jill with Community Planning and Development. Our department's vision is building community, and we do that by planning and regulating. I've forgotten the words. Oh, God. What does Janice say to us all the time? Anyway, our vision is building community. And our department oversees things from citywide and neighborhood planning, creation of regulatory tools such as our zoning code, and then Scott's group in terms of building permitting and inspections, as well as zoning permitting and inspections. And I was hired into this position. I started on April 28th of 2014, right when we in the city of Denver were in the midst of requiring all of the previously existing businesses to get a local license. And my boss at the time, Brad Buchanan, essentially said, Jill, get this figured out from a CPD perspective. So I jumped right in, having really no knowledge of the marijuana industry prior to this. So it was a big learning experience for me. And since that time, have really been kind of serving as our agency's point person for issues and regulation as it comes up in the marijuana industry. So, all right, let's go on to question 2. And so we can just kind of go down the line, but what is it about in a marijuana facility that makes an inspection for them different maybe than another type of facility?
I think from a building perspective, earlier on, as I mentioned earlier, that this industry, the owners and developers for marijuana facilities, they weren't really that knowledgeable about the construction industry. So the whole idea of permitting and getting an architect on board and all that, it sort of, it wasn't normal for them, to say the least. So the inspections at the early stages of this process were a lot different than they are now. Now it's like any other inspection. We have there are much fewer projects than there were before. So the number of contractors, electrical contractors, there's a handful that do it. They know what our inspectors expect at this point. Same thing with the mechanical. There's still issues that come up on jobs like any job, but it's a lot easier now than it was when the industry just started. A lot of it was just, some of it was bad behavior, some of it was unintended, and I think a lot of the facilities where they were unpermitted and then started to go through the permitting process, that's where the biggest hurdle was at the beginning. And we, fortunately, we're through the roughest part from a building perspective. I know Mark encounters more than, on a regular basis than that on the inspection side and other pieces of it.
And I think this kind of elaborates, shows pretty well, is Scott, this side of the table here, they deal with the building side and what's happening before, and then it's up to us to take what they've created and maintain that as inspectors. So I think one of the biggest differences as an inspector is there's a lot of expectations that have come from within the marijuana industry as to how a government treats them. And it's I spend quite a bit of time educating and informing and trying to get across that we're here as experts to help them, and not necessarily in the role as a regulator. And so I think that's our biggest challenge, is overcoming that hurdle of the expectations of what a government inspector looks like and what their goals are. So Richard.
Thanks, Mark. The question is, what makes inspecting a marijuana facility different than other facilities? From my perspective, from the health department perspective, inspecting a edible manufacturer, very similar to a wholesale food manufacturing inspection. You would be looking at the same things you look at in a retail inspection at the dispensary level. Temperature checks, approved source, employee illness policies, those type of things. When we look at the differences, the main differences that we're really looking at is just one additional ingredient, right? The marijuana, maybe two ingredients, hemp or marijuana. And with that being said, we work a lot closer with our inner city agencies and our state partners, much more than we would in just a normal food inspection at say a restaurant. When we compare a edible manufacturer to just a normal wholesale food manufacturer, that's kind of easy because we have, Denver has its own food code to apply to that industry. But when we start looking at something that's like a marijuana-infused product manufacturer that's doing extractions, the extraction technology is something that is not, you're not just going to walk in and see, okay, this fits how I would do a restaurant. You have to ask a lot of questions. There's a big learning curve. With that being said, we now have a specialized team that helps us conduct these inspections. Every district investigator in the city of Denver will conduct inspections at the dispensary level, whereas we have a specialized team. Sheila and myself, as the level 3s, handle a lot of the priority, higher level cases like contamination investigations, whereas the rest of our team, and they're here today, if you guys want to wave, they will help us conduct these marijuana-infused product manufacturers, especially when we're dealing with things like extractions. When I walk into one of these facilities for the first time and I see this equipment, I don't really know what it is. Something like a thin film molecular separator. I don't know what that is as someone that used to run restaurants and then started working with the health department. So those are some big differences between a normal inspection. And then when we try to fit that food peg into that round peg into a square hole, when we talk about inhalable products, what about vaporizing products? And what about these other type of products that we're starting to see emerge? Some other things that are different is we don't have the FDA. We don't have federal help when we're trying to decipher and work through some of the issues that come up. Oftentimes also in the cannabis industry, there's a significant lack of food safety understanding.
Great. All right. From a zoning perspective, I'll note that what makes it different from others is that our inspectors are out there far more often than any other type of business in the city. Our zoning and neighborhood inspection group typically is involved when there's a new building and they're signing off on a certificate of occupancy, or for certain other businesses that are licensed within the city, we do some inspections. But generally speaking, we don't in this city do inspections when a new use permit is granted, for instance, to verify that that's been set up. With marijuana, because of the licensing system and what we were seeing, our inspectors are heavily involved when there's a new license, when there's a renewal, when there's a modification of premise. And I would say that's probably another one of the challenges. Our inspectors will go out to a site and they have, well, now it's electronic, but it was paper-based, and they'll have 4 different inspection cards, and often the customer isn't exactly sure what it is that the different inspection cards are for, and it might be a transfer of a license and then a modification of premise, and it gets really complicated and really confusing for both them and our inspectors to fully understand what they're signing off on, and they may be able to sign off on one component but not another. So I'd say that the frequency has been a real challenge for us because of that frequency, we often find that they've made changes in the interim. So since the last time we were there, and have not gotten permits for that. So those from a zoning perspective, have been 2 of the key differences from others. All right, so next question. What typical issues do you encounter in a marijuana facility? And Richard, for you in particular, as opposed to a restaurant, as you were talking about that, where people are handling food being made, what are the public health risks and concerns when dealing with a marijuana concentrate being added to already made goods?
Right, I can start that one off if we want to switch up the
Sure, yeah.
the flow here. Well, there are similar issues that we would encounter during an inspection. I just mentioned lack of food safety knowledge and understanding of typical food rules that would be needed to be applied in the facility, such as approved source, as Kara mentioned in the previous session. We worry quite a bit about contaminated product making its way to the shelf, something that we don't necessarily see in the food world as much as we see in the cannabis world. Another issue is there's not always regular times of operation for some of these facilities. A lot of these facilities will be surrounded by a tall fence with barbed wire, and it's locked. So how do we access these facilities? Sometimes that can be tricky, and if we need to call an operator, then the unannounced inspection is no longer unannounced. We also have some concerns as far as like you would see in a restaurant, the same type of things, hand washing and sick employees, temperature controls. Kara mentioned in the track previously this morning, there is a risk for botulism that we have been definitely being proactive with to watch out, so we don't want that to happen. Other contamination issues might
No,
include,
we don't, I would just add.
Yeah,
That sounds scary.
it is kind of scary. We're just knock on wood every day, hoping that we can set up the operators for success, implement systems to ensure that those type of things don't occur. Other contaminations might be pesticides, microbial issues. Total yeast and mold has been an issue for us this year quite a bit. And we are looking at other things like heavy metals and mycotoxins in the plant material that ends up ultimately in a food in many cases. One instance that kind of worries us is what about a situation where it's a marijuana-infused product manufacturer where you are creating only smoking products, right? They may have different requirements from a plan review perspective. Maybe there are not hand washing sinks required there. But what happens when that manufacturer decides to make an oil and a food manufacturer wants to purchase that oil? Now, is that oil made in an environment where it has proper safety controls in place, 3-compartment sinks, hand washing, et cetera? That kind of worries us, and that could ultimately be a problem. And then we talk a lot about ingredients other than the marijuana. What about hemp? Is it being tested the same way as marijuana is? What about other things like vitamins or dietary supplements, essential oils, terpenes, things like that?
Scott, Mark, anything to add?
Yeah, let me pretend I know something. I agree. One of the big things that, as far as an issue that we deal with, I think all of us as inspectors, is right now there's a high employee turnover in the industry. So we do spend extra time educating employees as they come on board. And so the time we spent 6 months ago, now we have to start again with the new employees. So that becomes kind of an issue there. And then what Jill was mentioning earlier, it's also important as an inspector, especially with the marijuana industry, is to be able to understand the city's needs as far as getting license sign-offs and change of modification of premises and what that entails, so that when I show up at an inspection, I'm a city representative. People want to know, well, can you sign my card? Or who do I got to call? I called, left messages. How come nobody's gotten back to me? So as a city representative, it's important that I also know the procedures on that end so that I can help get that, be as efficient as possible and help these people get their needs met as far as regulatory. And also, touching on that again, this whole collaborative thing, understanding that when something changes in a facility, pass that on to the proper agency so that they can come out and take a look at it.
In terms of a building inspection point of view, what we run into, what issues we see on these projects, probably the most prevalent is that they're not following the drawings. So the electrical drawings are not following the single line diagrams, and they're sort of going their own way in the way that they're wiring it. They're changing equipment out. Things are different than they were on the plans that were approved, and what that does is in some instances, especially when it involves the electrical system, we make them resubmit modified drawings, and so that delays the project. So that's part of the reason why we really like to, at the beginning, we were having pre-meetings with the contractor to let them know what our expectations were and whatnot. But it still happens on a regular basis that folks just aren't following the plans. It happens with all jobs, not just marijuana jobs, but it's probably a little bit more prevalent here on these, especially with the equipment and some of the extraction, the new extraction equipment. A lot of that's changing out, and the way that they're installing the electrical systems for that. So those are probably the biggest things we're seeing right now.
So from a zoning perspective, as I mentioned, the changes that are seemingly happening quite a bit oftentimes without an updated zoning permit or site plan or floor plan is a big deal. And then the other thing, just kind of still recovering from where we started with this industry. So from a land use perspective, we changed our zoning code for the city in 2010. a number of businesses started in 2009 before there was, a licensing framework and a clear regulatory framework. And under our previous zoning code, a lot of times we were not often getting clear site plans or floor plans to document compliance. And so we're still in some ways living with a history of that. As people want to make changes or come in, or our inspector sees issues, we're often having to get, new and updated floor plans and site plans to clearly identify what's happening in a facility, which makes the customer a bit frustrated, but going forward will leave us in a much better position. Our inspectors will know clearly what is supposed to be out there, and what's happening on the site. But is an unfortunate kind of leftover from where we started in this industry when it was in some ways kind of the wild, wild west. All right, Mark, I'm going to have you answer the next question first to mix it up here. Can you provide an example of an incident where there was a disconnect between the regulatory authority and the industry from a fire perspective on your end?
Just one.
It's a couple.
And again, this isn't a comment on anybody here. This is the disconnect tends to be that again, like I said previously, we inherit the baggage that came with the industry from an illegal side, and we have to deal with that. The disconnect that we usually have is that we're here as like I said before, as experts in our fields, and we're not here to start an adversarial relationship. We're here to advocate not just for the process and for the people in the building, but also for the property owners, for the city, and for all the inspectors that follow along after us. So I think just in general, that tends to be our biggest disconnect is the attitude of, how do we go about this business? I'm here playing the long game. I'm here to set up people for success years down the road and try to bring about a change in perception, so that as we move forward, even just over the last 5 years, 6 years that we've been doing this, it's getting easier for us all together, working together to come up with a better process for the end user, the general public.
Scott, how about you from a building perspective?
So there's probably two that I could think of. One is more with the extraction, some of the equipment that's needed. All electrical equipment needs to be UL rated or some other approved rating system. And a lot of times they're very custom for what's being needed for their extraction. So they haven't gone through a UL testing. It's very expensive to go through that. And so they haven't gone through that for this new system or new modification to hoods or other components. And so third parties are required to come in, evaluate, give a report, and they submit them to fire, and our electrical team reviews those as well. I think that was a learning curve for the industry, that we still struggle with getting those reports. They don't quite understand. Every couple of months, I'll get the email or the phone call. Someone's really upset. Why can't we get through our process? I don't understand. Why does this need to be tested? It works. So that's one piece that folks have trouble understanding. Another is we have a lot of the light systems have unistrut systems that are usually suspended from the structure above, and there's specific criteria to follow for that. And then they try and customize it in the field and make modifications and don't follow the manufacturer's recommendations. And then when that happens, there's no sort of guarantee that the structural integrity of the lights, there's a lot of weight on some of the lighting systems, that it's going to work if they're not following the manufacturer's recommendations. And most of our electrical inspectors, all of our electrical inspectors are electrical contractors by trade. They're all licensed. And they know how they've done it in the industry and how they've always followed the manufacturer's literature and requirements. And when we see variations from that, the community has really pushed back on this for whatever reason, whether it be a timing to get the right pieces in place from the Unistrut company, or I'm not sure exactly. I think it takes more time for them to argue with us and have meetings and figure this out than if they were just to follow the manufacturer recommendation. So, but it happens more often than you'd think.
Richard, how about you?
So example incidents in the field is the question. How do we respond and where was the disconnect? Kara mentioned some of the thoughts and stories that I was thinking about. If you haven't heard the washing machine story, come talk to us afterwards. We'll tell you all about it. But that was a clear lack of food safety knowledge there. We also mentioned earlier today essential oils that are meant for topical use only or aromatherapy being added into edible products. Again, that's an ingredient issue. Both of those situations ultimately resulted in a recall, and it was good education because in this industry, everyone talks to each other. So the moment that something like this happens, where we do a recall for, say, an essential oil that's not meant for food but was put into food, then the industry will all talk to each other. So that's kind of a good thing because then everyone kind of knows, okay, hey, the health department is paying attention to this. Maybe we should pay attention to this too. One thing that I worked with the fire department on, a good example of cross-departmental work together. I think fire department sent it to us, and they were on site. They had found a residential facility that was a hemp extraction facility in a garage. Large amounts of dry plant material, no hand washing sinks, anything like that. And that was a good example of maybe the industry not knowing that they needed to be licensed and go through plan review and go through building review to do solvent storage correctly per the fire department. Other things that come to mind would be mold is kind of a hot topic right now. Total yeast and molds within the industry is set by Marijuana Enforcement Division for what the allowable amount is, and right now it's 10,000 CFU. We will take action on products if it's failing at the state level when it's tested at the laboratories. And that's a pretty low level, and we get that. And sometimes I think that the industry thinks we might be overreacting. But we like to be better safe than sorry. Again, the proactive approach rather than reactive approach. Yeah, thank you.
All right, so from a zoning perspective, I feel weird having to say that every time. I'd say one of the biggest disconnects, there's two that have happened, and that one of which continues to happen. The first being extractions. I think we were naively thinking it was some folks mixing some marijuana leaves into some brownie batter and, no real hazard, similar to, a commercial kitchen. And then we started to see more submittals coming in that talked about sort of more industrial type processes. And we had someone come in for a roughly 10,000 square foot just extraction facility. And we kind of went, wait a minute, what's going on here? And, reached out to our friends in fire prevention and tried to understand what they were seeing and what they were viewing for extraction. And realized that from a land use perspective, we didn't have these categorized correctly. They were allowed under a commercial kitchen use, which could be in most zone districts in our city, and then a land use we call general manufacturing, also allowed in many parts of our city. And when we start seeing 10,000 square foot extraction facilities, using solvents, it started to feel very much like an industrial process. And so we pulled together some folks, both internal and then with the industry, to really figure out, all right, what is it you guys are doing, which was seeming to change on a weekly basis to get better educated. And then we wrote new regulations into our zoning code to better categorize these types of facilities in terms of what they were actually doing and what we were seeing. So that was a pretty big surprise that took quite a bit of time to figure out, but I think we're in a much better place now. And then the other issue that we're continuing to see, especially with grow facilities, because they need so much usually additional power than whatever previous industrial use was there before, these folks are getting new services from Xcel Energy, our local electrical service provider, and requiring much larger transformers. And our zoning code was written to allow only 3-foot tall transformers in certain setbacks. And what we were seeing was 5 to 8 foot tall transformers going in. And so we had cases going to our Board of Adjustment, and they were getting quite upset. Xcel Energy was getting upset because they, the customer was getting upset because they weren't showing these locations on their site plans. And so we actually ended up making another change to our zoning code to allow these larger transformers in certain setback locations, rear and side interior, but to date have still not allowed them in our primary street and side street setbacks. And so we're continuing to see that being a challenge. And I'm not sure what we need to do to better communicate with both our customers and Xcel that placement of that matters. But that is a continuing disconnect between us and the industry. All right. Richard, I think you may have answered this one already, but maybe for Mark and Scott, what is the most surprising or concerning situation that you've encountered in the field, and how did you or your agency respond? And if you want to add anything, feel free, Richard.
Thank you.
Just be quiet, Richard. I think some of the ones, there's quite a few examples, but one of the most memorable was we'd arrived at a facility, and we'd been working with them to try to get the electrical system straightened out in their building. And they were one tenant of 4 or 5 grow facilities. And when our initial inspector had been out there years ago, I shouldn't say years ago, months ago, he noted that they had their electrical panels open to the air, and they said that they're overheating their system, so they needed to leave those open. So we had been working to get this building compliant, and we showed up for an inspection, and my officer and another inspector, and there's a loud bang, and the one with survival instincts jumped in the car and hid while we just stood there and looked up, and one of their transformers was arcing and sparking, and as we followed the sparks down to the ground, right below that transformer was a 100-pound tank of propane. So we tried to evacuate the area, but instead the operator ran through the shower of sparks and started disconnecting his power, and that was quite the interesting event in that time.
Yes, that sounds terrifying. Scott?
So when I went and asked our 2 supervisor chiefs with mechanical and plumbing and our electrical, I said, so what? Asked them the same questions. Immediately, you just picked, well, yesterday I went out to the site and this is what I saw, and you just start slipping through it, and all just wires with no junction boxes, just wired knotted together and just like dangling everywhere, and that's the typical thing that you see electrically. There's just daisy chained. He showed me a picture in the same inspection where instead of using wiring, they just had all of their. He said they ran extension cords for all their lighting, and there was this big bundle of extension cords just like all pulled together, nicely wire wrapped together, cut off, and then they just wire them together to the light, and so that was their wiring system. But the other thing that Jimmy, our chief mechanical supervisor of inspections, he said he went down to a grow in a basement. He said, well, as soon as he walked in the door, he knew there was something up because of the odor of sort of equipment, the carbon monoxide smell, and I guess they were running the hot water heater and the heater. They decided to terminate the flue for the hope that would help grow the marijuana better with that in the air. So that was a great idea to them, and fortunately no one died in the instance. We didn't find any bodies, but it was pretty dangerous. They couldn't believe as soon as they walked in the door, they noticed this is not right. So that's pretty incredible that people are doing things that are just, you would never believe that you go out there and see that, and it's happening on a regular basis, unfortunately. It's more the illegal sort of residential that you electrically, it's just, again, Tony's phone, it was just flip, 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 every picture. It was just something really scary electrically. And we're really lucky we don't have a lot more fires than we do in Denver.
Richard, do you want to add anything on that?
I would like to thank the fire department and building department for keeping us safe. My stories are definitely not as scary as arcing reactors and on top of propane tanks. I walk into a marijuana-infused product manufacturer that's making food products, and there's no hand washing sink. That's kind of my scary stories. Other issues, maybe we need eye protection for the bright lights. So things like that are kind of where my brain went. But maybe the scariest thing that I've seen was there's lots of money lying around. So I've seen $20,000 in cash just in a box because the banking issue can be problematic for the industry. I remember going, this was 2014 when things were brand new. I remember going to one dispensary, and I got a weird vibe. My spider senses were kind of tingling. Something doesn't seem right here. The operators are kind of acting strange. And I went back 6 months later, and the whole facility was boarded up, and there was federal posting about how there was something about tax. And I learned later on that they had seized something like 20 machine guns and like $1 million in cash. And that, I think they told me it was cartel that was there. We don't really see that anymore, but at the very, very beginning, there was some of those safety concerns for theft, money, that maybe illicit market.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I think that's a good point. Is risk management hasn't identified loose $20 bills on the floor as being a fall hazard, but it is, it happens, and all those loose 20s, just you get a layer on there that actually is kind of slippery. So in the marijuana industry, that's a unique situation you have to be aware of as an inspector is, fall hazards due to a loose change. So.
All right, so I chatted with our zoning inspectors, and certainly some of the things they talked about, not really scary situations such as you all described, but just often issues with plans not matching, and they go out there one time, and next thing they know, they go back, and suddenly there's a new grow facility next door and rooms that weren't there before, and issues like that. I can recall from hearing a couple stories from our zoning inspectors, especially on where we found residential houses being used as grow facilities. They were a number of years ago leading some teams to deal with that and seeing some pictures of just the extension cords and the wiring and things that had been modified to these houses that were just kind of like, that could catch fire and impact not only that house, but the people right next door. And that was a scary situation. There was another where someone was growing far more marijuana than our code allows for personal use. If memory serves, it was both in the backyard and then in the basement, and they had strung up barbed wire all around the backyard fence, which is a concern in our communities. And what does that, what kind of message does that send? So, from a zoning perspective, it was a little different, but still concerning. No, not usually.
I think that kind of all goes back to what we were saying before. Is we're working to change this attitude where it was okay before. This is how we operated before. Well, now that you're a member of the business community, this type of behavior is no longer allowable, and it's not conducive to a long, successful business.
All right, so Richard, question just for you from Department of Public Health and Environment's perspective. Can you describe what producers test for? And are these being done effectively? And what oversight do you or your agency have of those processes, if any?
This is just for me?
Yeah, just for
All
you.
right. That's a great question. Great questions. Let me first start by separating how that kind of works. The Marijuana Enforcement Division is the state agency that does require routine testing of all products, plant material, concentrates, edible products. Typically, they're testing for potency, microbials, total yeast and mold, Sometimes residual solvents, if a product like a concentrate is made with something like a hydrocarbon. Now, Denver does not require testing for any facilities since our state partner already requires these tests. Now, the difference would be what Denver does is if we suspect or we have evidence, we receive a complaint, something like that, of some sort of suspected contamination, then that's where we may show up and issue orders for testing, depending on what the complaint is. So what we would then do would utilize the state licensed laboratories. Generally, we align with the Marijuana Enforcement Division for threshold limits of what we're looking for. Now, I guess the broader question is this done effectively, right? And what oversight do we have? Generally, with the Marijuana Enforcement Division, there's not a oversight. The Marijuana Enforcement Agency is not there when the samples are taken for routine testing. So there may be some gaps there. We've heard lots of stories from industry themselves telling us like, oh yeah, we use this for the testing and we sell this over here. So to us, that's potentially problematic. We will oversee any testing if there's some sort of contamination investigation. And the way that the metric system is set up is we can follow that to the laboratory, and then we can also trace it back to where it was grown. So for us, marijuana is pretty easy. Hemp is where it gets a little tricky because these tests are not required at the hemp level, at least not yet. I know that the state, the Colorado Department of Agriculture, the Marijuana Enforcement Division, and Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment are working with stakeholders, including Denver, to try to tackle hemp as a potential issue. So the accuracy of tests is also a potential problem there. So Kara mentioned this earlier today, but Denver has secured some funding, and we're planning to do a baseline study where we are going to randomly select various products throughout the city, including flour, pre-rolls, concentrates, and have those tested. And that may, what we're trying to do is uncover any potential gaps that might exist. And if we find, that there's some problems, and Kara articulated this really well earlier, when the product is, you grow a plant, you dry it out, and then you harvest it. That's generally where most sampling occurs. Testing occurs. But there's so many other touches before it gets to the shelf for the consumer. It could be trimmed and then placed in bags and then shipped to the retail outlet, then stored in jars, potentially sniffed by consumers perpetually for several weeks, then turned into pre-rolls. And in that process, lots of contamination could occur.
So I have to stop you. What is a pre-roll?
A pre-roll, it would be plant material placed in paper, rolled up like a cigarette.
Oh, okay.
Yes, a joint.
Sorry,
So-
I'm not up on my terminology.
That's all
apparently.
right. I gotta sometimes watch myself on that.
We gotta get you out more, Jill.
We gotta hang with our slang here.
All right. So Mark, how about from Denver Fire's perspective? Do you find that there are more safety hazards at marijuana facilities? And if so, why do you think that might be?
I think that's pretty much a definite yes. And I think it's really hard to put one particular cause, but I think for the most part, what we're seeing is these facilities tend to be in a constant state of flux. There's always construction. And we were talking about that before, where zoning has a lot of inspections based on modification of premises. So there's a desire to hurry up and get stuff done and get into production instead of waiting for these sign-offs and these inspections, waiting for Tony to come out and do his electrical inspection and public health come out and look at their side. So they tend to get ahead of the process just because the city is being stressed by the need for the number of inspections. So, and this kind of goes back to our our role as everyday, street level inspectors is to monitor what's really going on and get that information back to our supervisors so that they can make the adjustments that need to be done to help make sure that, everyone's operating safely and not getting ahead of the process.
Great, thank you. All right, so for all of you, any of you who want to tackle this, what have you or your agency done to ensure the marijuana industry understands what they are required to do?
I think I'll start with you guys. We Jill and I reached out to some of the industry leaders, and we recently changed the policy, but in doing that, we really got a better understanding of, and a better relationship developed with them on looking at it. It was a change from, we originally had indicated the retail and the medical as a B use group, and then we realized after walking through, we took tours of a number of facilities in Denver, and like this is retail. This should be an M use, not a B use. So we have a new policy in place. And in doing that and hearing from those folks, we realized we probably need to have a public forum like we do with our residential customers and with our commercial customers. Once a year, we have a forum. We go through our permitting process and any new policies we have in place and regulations and sort of some of the pitfalls of working through a project or a residential project, commercial project. We realized we needed to do this with the marijuana industry. There was still, we realized from the very beginning when it was like this, working with the marijuana industry and our teams, we realized some of that was still left, that there was some animosity or some maybe ill trust, or they thought we were being too tough on them, or we're honing in on this industry specifically, that we're being unfair. We're going over the top on our inspections, our plan review, and their perception is and was that we were just being tough on them. We're tough on everybody, so we're not biased. But the reality was this forum, it was about an hour and 15-minute presentation, and we really, I feel we mended some fences at that presentation. It was really helpful. There were over 150 folks from the industry that came to the presentation. They stayed for a long time afterward. We had a long dialogue with individuals, handed out my business card. I mentioned this yesterday. We had this forum. My business card has my cell phone number, and I'm like, contact me if you're having trouble in the process, whether it be plan review or inspections, please reach out to me. I will help facilitate your project. And I do believe received some really positive feedback since that happened 8 or 9 months ago. And I still am getting emails for assistance from folks, and they're really appreciative. And I do believe the work that Jill and I had sort of nurtured with this industry has been a tremendous benefit for them and for us. I think it was a win-win because now they know exactly what our expectations are, and we're able to get through issues more. And I think that that level of perceived bias towards them has been greatly reduced. I think there's still some there. I don't think we're going to get rid of it entirely, but I do believe that's been significantly reduced.
Yeah, I'll just say I'm kicking myself that we didn't do that, 3 or 4 years ago. And I don't know what finally set the light bulb off on my head to put that together, but I do think that was really helpful. The other thing I'll add, and with excise and license and the marijuana policy team, leading, we're very much working across agencies, so we're working together when issues arise. It's not, just one of us and then another one comes. We're trying to collaborate and listen. I will say, I hear things from the industry, and as Scott said, they'll call, and this goes, for anyone. But if there are issues or problems or things that aren't clear, let's listen and work together to resolve it. And so I think that's been, a really big part of where I see my role is really just to try to better understand what's happening in the industry, try to communicate how that relates to our world, and then figure out an appropriate solution.
I think that was a really good question, Jill, about because I'm sitting here thinking about this, and the fire department and, just different agencies, and I'm looking out here seeing all you, and Realistically, we don't have to do a whole lot to reach out to the industry because we have that marijuana industry bulletin that's been set up by the city, and a lot of the industry receives those. So when we identify an issue that we might want addressed, I'll bring it to the chief, and they'll vet that and decide, well, yeah, we'll send this out to the marijuana industry through their bulletin. And that's pretty effective. And it also, I know I receive those bulletins, so every time the health department has a product recall, I'm aware of that as well, even though that doesn't directly affect me. It's knowledge that I can take out as an inspector. And so I think just that one aspect, that marijuana industry bulletin that we have, is one of our most effective means to get that out quickly. And then relying on the fact that the industry speaks together a lot, I think the word gets out really quick. And then each individual agency isn't responsible for trying to reach out to the industry. We can do it as a city team.
Great answer. I was actually going to say that too. But nonetheless,
Sentence.
yes. As well, Scott, the licensing thing that we did earlier this year, that was great as well. I think with any industry, there are players that do great and try really hard and stay informed, and others that don't do as good a job. So for us, and I think Brandon from Portland said this really well yesterday, be available and answer questions. Customer service is very important to us. We want to be a resource for industry. So reaching out and helping, education efforts, I think, is a good thing to work towards. We have done one meeting where we invited, this happened last year, I want to say about a year ago, where we invited industry owners, compliance officers, just to let them know what the health department's doing. What are we looking at? And I think we had over 150 people show up, and we talked to them about a lot of our concerns and listened to their concerns. Since then, we've developed a lot of education documents. We have guidance documents for shelf stability, special concerns with cannabis extractions, how to go through licensing and plan review, what about social consumption, and we've even developed a basic food safety class that's geared towards the MIPS, geared towards the marijuana-infused product manufacturers. So that's, I think, how we're trying.
It's great to hear. Are there any other unique needs or aspects of inspecting marijuana facilities you'd like to share that we haven't already?
Hi, Richard.
All right. Let's see. One thing that differs for us in the cannabis world is a lot of, in the food world, if you want to make any kind of specialized product, generally you're going to get approval through the FDA and then you're going to launch your products. Now, we're perfectly comfortable with regulating chocolate bars, and we're getting pretty comfortable with even vaporizer technology, but as we see new products like suppositories or eye drops, nasal sprays, lubricants, vitamins, I saw a little blue pill infused this week. I've heard about intravenous is something that folks are talking about. And how does this fit in with local applicable rules that we try to fit into food code? So those are some of the more interesting things that we see regularly, and generally we have to do a ton of research on this stuff just to try to keep up with industry. I think Danica said it this morning really well, that the industry innovates faster than we can regulate. They're always thinking of something new, and then we play catch up.
Yeah, I think that's good, because Richard had mentioned this earlier, was glasses when you're doing an inspection out in a grow facility. So they make sunglasses or eye protection specifically for like when you're in the UV light of the high-pressure sodium lights. They make glasses that protect your eyesight when you're in LED lights. So I think one of our unique needs as inspectors at these facilities is our ability to monitor the environment and make sure that what we're going into is safe, and also to make sure that we can continue to be effective inspectors. My inspections might not record it, but I think it's usually better if I can see when I'm inspecting. And so years down the line, if I still have good vision, I can identify these issues. So looking long term, this personal protective equipment is important that we maintain a healthy inspecting force so that we can be effective. And I always see the fire department especially as we're the first wave to try to get into these facilities, identify environmental concerns, and that way we can pass that on and make sure our health department inspectors are safe, because they do 2 inspections a year just like we do.
Thank you for that.
And I and then when let's say when we come out for an electrical inspection, the electrical inspectors are out. We have to make sure that not only are the employees working in a safe workspace, but also that all the following inspectors that follow along after us are able to work in a safe workspace.
And you bring up a good point, Mark, that a couple of years ago, our risk management team went through a whole effort to ensure that our inspectors had the right personal protective equipment for what they were doing, which I think was a really important exercise that in some ways I wish would have been thought of much earlier in the process. Because I know early on we had gotten some complaints from others complaining that our inspectors smelled like marijuana, because just from being in some of these facilities, it easily gets on your clothes. So thinking through some of the things like that as inspectors are going to other places throughout the day is important. And I know it's come up a bit as we're starting to explore the brand new world of social consumption. And there have been concerns raised by our inspectors about, well, what if they're vaping inside? And, do I have to go in and inspect? And, is that going to impact me at all? So certainly new challenges and questions coming up every day.
I think one thing that I had mentioned yesterday, I wish more LED lights were being used in Denver, because we're really pushing sustainability. And when I was talking to our inspectors today, I was really pleasantly surprised that over the last 6 months or so, they are seeing more light replacement projects happening with LED lights. So I will say that's a change that is a real positive. I think a great positive for this industry, because the amount of energy consumption used and wasted in the growth of marijuana is crazy when you think about potentially 600 facilities we have just in Denver, using lights that were just really tremendous drain on power. So that's really great to see the number of lighting replacements for LEDs. So that's a real plus. Probably a negative. It's always a negative with a plus. Maybe we're not going to be able to see this high energy spikes now for illegals and other and single families, but we'll take that. I think that's a win that we're having that energy savings.
Great, thanks everybody. All right, I'm going to combine kind of 2 of our questions here. How do you think businesses can better prepare for an inspection? And do you have any best practices or tips that you often give out or provide?
I guess I can start. One thing I tell operators all the time is look at us as part of your team. Think of us as part of your team that is a resource for you. We may only be in your facility once or twice a year, but we're available to you all year long. So we really encourage folks to reach out to us. Instead of doing something and hoping it's okay, just reach out and find out ahead of time. We really like to cultivate relationships with the industry, and we encourage the same thing back, respect, transparency, those type of things. Generally in this industry, it's very compliant. It really is pretty compliant. And operators do want to share with you. And most of what I've learned, I've just learned through questions asked. Like I said, they want to share and they want to be compliant. So I'd just say vet your hires, vet ingredients, ask if something's okay before you do it. Maybe take our basic food safety class. That's a potential thing. But ultimately just using us as a resource.
I think the fire department here, we kind of take an opposite approach. I tell people I don't want them to prepare for my inspection. I want to see them at their worst day. I want to see when everything's, there's extension cords throughout the building, exits are blocked. I want to see that, because that's my opportunity to educate them and say, and work out a way to resolve those situations so that they don't just call a code red when Mark's at the front door and then everybody hustles to clear it off. I'd rather see these violations, and then that gives me an opportunity to explain why it's a hazard, why we don't want those. It's not just Mark Rudolph doesn't like extension cords, but there's an actual reason behind what we're regulating. So I'm odd that way. I want to see these violations so that it gives me an opportunity to educate them. And also, like I said in the previous question, was we're here to start the process to all the oncoming inspectors that are going to follow along behind us. So I think is what I would recommend for best practices for the industry is take what the street level inspectors teach you and implement that, so that as we go forward over time, your worst day is a lot less every time, and the violations just get, because everybody knows what we're looking for and what's required, we don't have the violations. And again, that's what I was saying previously about the long game, is as we educate, then you can take that information and then eliminate these violations, and then pretty soon we're just coming by to say hi rather than to inspect.
I think that similar, the relationship that our inspectors, we have a sort of just a refined few, there's about 4, and it's only because of the district they're in. That's primarily where the grows are and some of the other facilities are. But the relationship they're developing with them is greater now, and they know there are still things that happen. They're still putting plywood up on the light fixture stands and blocking sprinklers. They're still adding plants and impeding egress, and they're still using the extension cords. It's happening, but I do think that the relationship that's getting better between the inspectors and the owners, they're picking up the phone and making calls now. There's a dialogue there that wasn't there before, and I think the more that we can create that relationship, the comfort level to pick up the phone and call our inspection team before they do the bad act, the better. I think that one of the biggest things, frustrating things that we see is, and Jill had mentioned this earlier, is that, they're in a building and, hey, there's an extra room over here. I could just throw another grow up there. That's probably the biggest thing that they do, and it's a little bit easier, I guess. They're making money, and then they get a slap on the wrist, and then they come back in and do it the right way. But if we could get them on the front end, if they could think a couple months before that they want to do that, and then we could help them through the process, that would be better. But
So a couple of tips that our zoning folks put together after hearing some feedback from the industry is we actually, I think it was earlier this year, finalized a checklist, if you will, that we made public for the industry so that they know what it is we're going to be looking for when we come out for an inspection and what they should have available. And I think that has helped and gone a long ways. And I know Scott Electrical had done that actually quite some time ago. Do you want to mention that at all? Or?
yeah, at the beginning, I mean, we did put a checklist together because we were seeing consistent issues. So the checklist was handed out, and there was actually a pre-construction meeting with our electrical team, and they handed out, hey, these are our expectations, because there were a lot of folks that were not the best of actors in a lot of electrical contractors were not doing the right thing, and maybe getting bad direction from the owner, or maybe not doing the right thing. And I think this really helped develop what the expectations were right at the bat, before the construction even started. So I think our team was really forward-thinking with doing this earlier on to avoid some of the problems that we were seeing.
All right, we're wrapping up here, so we can have some time here for other questions, but maybe just two questions kind of tied together to wrap up if you each want to answer. Any lessons learned for regulators that you've passed on based on what you've seen in the inspection field? And then how does your agency coordinate with others to ensure a smooth inspection process?
I'll take a turn this time, give Richard a break. Some of our lessons learned here, it's easier to move forward than it is to have to go back. I look back at our regulation of butane extraction rooms and the difficulty that it took to get everybody compliant again, even though it was I want to say straightforward, but the goal was pretty straightforward, so it shouldn't have been that difficult, but it was, and so I think the best thing you can do is understand the process, and I think Brian spoke to this at his conference earlier yesterday. Have a good understanding of what they're trying to achieve, so that you only have to go through the process one time to get these facilities safe and compliant. It's just too difficult to go backwards and have to try to do this again. In coordinating, I think I'm really lucky, realistically, for the fire department. Coordinating with the rest of the cities is so simple. I know who to call. Hopefully I never have to call Scott or the chief, but occasionally that happens. But I have that ability, and the fact that I'm confident in that. If I need to call Danica to let her know that we have issues at a place and she's going to get an inspector out there, it's, for me, coordination with the city's easy, because I know the people. I know who. I know their faces. I may not have everyone's phone number, but I know I can. I have multiple ways to get that contact out there. I can let Nicole know. She can get out to everybody that needs to go. So we're really fortunate in the fire department to have that ability.
I guess I can elaborate on that. I think the lesson that I would most like to say would be, once you think you've seen it all, you will see something brand new and unexpected. So it's a fascinating industry, and there's always something new that we'll be roundtabling at the office, like, guess what I saw? So that's kind of maybe something to keep in mind. I think that there's a need for interdepartmental communication. We have regular city agency meetings where we all come together and talk about what we're seeing. And I think that is just so useful in helping understand potential hazards out there. How can we help the industry? For example, they put together a checklist. And we said, hey, that's a good idea. We're going to put together a checklist too. And so now we have a checklist that's available. As far as how do we coordinate to ensure smooth inspections, I think that lines of communication staying open is important, especially with the city agencies, but as well as the state partners that are in this with us. Our website has lots of great resources. You can always check that out. Little plug. It's kind of a if I knew what I know now type of industry. So just ask lots of questions and continue to learn.
Yeah, I think that the coordination piece and the dialogue that we have is great with every department. It's been really fantastic. I know our inspectors, and speaking with Tony today, I think one of the things that they feel great about now is it's really coordinated. Police go in first is for the single-family homes that are, instead of having 12 plants, they have 112 plants, and maybe not the best actors there. They feel a lot more comfortable now that we have a really very specific process. Police go in, take care of it, clean it up. Fire turns off the power, and we go in, and it's just a much better sequence than I think when we first started. We were sort of testing the waters along the way, but it's really at a point now where there's a great communication and dialogue between police, fire, health, building, and it really has helped the inspection of those illegal sort of facilities that we have to go into on a regular basis.
And I think it's also good to note that it's not just a matter of communication, it's a matter of understanding. I understand what the electrical department needs. The police understand what the fire department and the building department will need. So there isn't just the communication, we also have the understanding of how we're interconnected and how we can maximize each other's abilities and work together even when we're not physically together. I know that when this happens, when I follow this procedure, when the electrical department comes out to inspect this, they're going to be more efficient in their time and they're going to be safer. So communication as well as understanding between agencies is huge.
Yeah, just to wrap it up, the thing I love to hear is when our folks say, well, I don't think it's a zoning issue, but you probably better talk to building and fire. And just to have that awareness and ability to think about sort of impacts outside of just your field, I think is incredibly important and has brought us together on issues outside of just marijuana. It's been a huge help across the board. So, all right, with that, it is time to start your questions. So I think there's 2 microphones. So if you want to line up, and we'll just kind of take one by one. We've got about 15 minutes for your questions, and would love to hear what you're hearing and how we might be able to help share some of our experiences.
So I have a question that's going to land with Richard at the end, but some of the things that the health inspectors that I'm a hearing officer, I've had the opportunity to see how careful and concerned they are with the public health and at trying to protect the public health against the rapid pace of innovation in this industry. So I guess my question is, why aren't there some hard limits to this innovation? For example, Richard, and this is where it lands in your corner, why should a grow operation be able to test out of, over a period of 6 weeks, the ability to, or the requirement that they test for pesticide residues for an entire year because they've been clean for 6 weeks? Because that's 3 crops then that they can spray with stuff, and the public will not know what they are smoking if they smoke the flower. Maybe even a more dramatic point is, why isn't there a hard line put around their development of intravenous injections? I mean, legalization under Amendment 64 and then in the analog in these other states doesn't necessarily mean that you just cut all the stoners loose and let them do what, experiment on the public health with all these wacky innovations.
Thank you, Macon. Yeah, that's great questions. I think that when we first passed Amendment 64, we didn't necessarily know what we were getting into. I think Canada is taking a page from our book and doing it the right way, where they're going to say, what are you doing? Okay, that's okay. Whereas it is kind of opposite here. It is a little bit Wild West, and we're sailing in uncharted waters. When we talk about the process validation is what you're talking about, that's a Marijuana Enforcement Division rule. So some of the constraints that we work within are, we have Denver, and we regulate Denver. The state agencies come up with a lot of these rules, and we are stakeholders at the table. We participate regularly in red line rulemaking sessions, and these are concerns that we have. The process validation, where you can sample several times and then you're good for the year. There's some thought behind that, and we don't want to make it too hard for industry. We want them to be able to be successful and continue to make money, because then if it's not affordable for consumers, then maybe they will go back towards the illicit market. When we talk about things like intravenous, that's not something that I've heard would be allowed at this point. It's only in research and development. And when I first heard that, I was shocked. I'm thinking about someone with needles in an alley, and that's probably what we all thought when I said that word, intravenous. But to play the flip side of that coin, in a research and development clean room environment that's regulated, inspected, and it's under research and development with university, the thought is more, what about a cancer patient that's going through chemotherapy or something like that, and with the oversight of a physician, like an infused saline bag? Because as we learn more and more about the different cannabinoids that exist in this marvelous plant, there's so many things that we're just scratching the surface on. So if there's some sort of methodology that under the guise of regulation and authority paying attention, inspections, et cetera, that we can maybe see these products down the road, maybe that's something worth exploring. So we need to always take a step back and not get too far ahead of ourselves when we hear things. But at the same time, there are lots of limits that I'd like to put in place if it were up to me specifically. But it's a greater framework that we're trying to work within. I don't know if I answered your question adequately, but that was my best go I could take at it.
I don't want to kind of step outside of my authority, but we also have to realize here in Denver, we're the test bed. Whether we agree with something or not, a lot of these things are occurring outside of our jurisdiction. We're very fortunate that we have the model that we have, that we've just got through talking about, where we're highly effective because we communicate. So if there's an issue that needs to be addressed as far as cannabis use or delivery methods, I think Denver is well up to the task of identifying the risks involved and coming up with a solution for that, because it's not going to go away. And if we were to expect some rural county to come up with the solutions, it's going to have negative consequences. And that's just my personal opinion as far as the people that I see out here today. They have that knowledge, skill, and abilities to come up with an effective solution that's going to spread out throughout the country. And kudos to them, because I couldn't do it. So I just wanted to kind of elaborate on that for you.
All right, next question.
I have, sorry, my name is Alex Rubin. I work with Craft Concentrates. Before I get to my questions, I do want to give you some insight on the previous question. In terms of process validation, for a grow, they are subject to every harvest batch is tested through that 6-week period. Every single plant. So if you are in a cultivation, you are then potentially testing up to 100 to 200 plants during that 6-week period. So it's not just 3 harvest batches. And then after that 6-week period, they are still subject to at least one of those harvest batches every 30 days. So it's not a year of time that they're not testing anything. There's definitely restrictions of that process validation. So I'd like to give us some insight on that. The other is with intravenous production, there's been no products that actually have intravenous production. It's language surrounding syringes, which are oils that are put into a syringe that is accessible to then transfer into a cartridge or to be able to consume that oil. There's nothing that is being injected into anyone's body that is cannabis related whatsoever. So that's not been produced. I just wanted to give you guys some general insights on that. One of the things that you said, Rich, was that oil producers that are selling that oil to edible companies, that product is being tested, yet they don't know if their facilities are clean or if they have general sanitary requirements for that. Would the city then possibly be interested in giving a certification to those oil companies that are up to code, that do have those requirements, and then be able to have those companies market to edible companies that we have the certification stamp from the city that says that we have a great facility, that we are up to par with all fire and building and zoning requirements? I think that would be a interesting part of the industry if manufacturers could then sell their products to edible companies or other companies and say, we have the stamp of certification by the city. Is that something that you guys would be interested in?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. We have something kind of on the reverse of that we already do. So when a business is going through plan review, they're going through each agency, determining what's required, what equipment, fixtures, et cetera. When we see that a facility is going to produce inhalable products only, the public health risks for something like eating a food are a little bit different, since you're going to be inhaling this product. So rather than certifying those facilities that are ready for, have hand washing sinks and 3-compartment sinks, what we do is we call them SMIPs, or smoking manufacturing marijuana infused products. That's kind of our little coin phrase. But if it's a smoking only MIP, then we have you sign an affidavit that you're not going to be selling product to a food manufacturer, because you don't have the same requirements. You might not have any hand washing sinks or anything like that. Whereas if you go through the plan review to produce foods, then we know that you have the right equipment in place, and then you're just basically like a food manufacturing MIP, or a food MIP, or edible MIP. So with that being said, I think that is a good idea, because as craft concentrate, how do you know when you're sourcing this oil? And that's a concern. So I'd love to talk to you further about potentially.
Yeah, distillate has become a pretty primary source for a lot of edible companies, because it gets rid of the weed taste, in which craft concentrates produces amazing distillate, in which we are able to market to edible companies that we produce awesome distillate, and they use that distillate in their edible products. So that's just one scenario that I had. Another question, for equipment testing and equipment UL or ETL testing, what's the cost on getting that listing for that equipment, and how long does that testing process happen?
I'll start with it, and Mark, if you want to enhance. But like a UL, like if you were to go to a UL laboratory and get a test, it takes several months at best, and then you're looking at thousands and thousands of dollars. It's not inexpensive. You're probably 30 plus at minimum. Don't quote me on that. I just, from other architectural, structural, UL, I've heard some significant dollars, and I think it goes a lot higher than that actually for some of these tests, and that's why they're not tested, because it's cost prohibitive.
Yes, exactly. Sorry, just one more question. You said that you guys were planning on doing random sampling for products around the industry. Is that going to be from the dispensary side of things, so already on the shelf that you'll go and then purchase these or get them and then test them, or is that going to be coming straight from the producer, random sampling? How do you guys plan on doing that?
So random sampling is something that we have been talking about and thinking about. I mentioned the baseline study that we're working on right now. First, what we're going to do is do a study. We're working with Denver Public Health to make sure that this baseline study is tight. the statistics that we generate from it will potentially help us make decisions as to whether or not that's something we want to move forward with.
Thank you.
I'm going to move over to this gentleman over here, and then I think we're pretty much out of time.
Oh, no, I got a bunch of questions. My name's Steve Clark. I'm with the Aurora Marijuana Enforcement Division. I'm the Chief Electrical Inspector for Aurora. My question is, well, actually not a question, to Richard. Have you seen the medical dose inhalers? Have you seen any of those yet?
I have.
Okay, so that's the technology that's coming out now, so be aware that that's out there. As far as the rest of the room, to address your question on third-party listings or NRTL, Nationally Recognized Testing Laboratories, the extraction process there's really no electrical motors on that. It's all passive and pressure related, so it's tank and vessel. You're going to want to go to like PSI would be your peer review, not an engineering. You'd want a peer review by that. That's a little bit less expensive than an NRTL. We accept that in Aurora. The other thing, anybody who's going to be an enforcement agent in this industry needs to know how these machines operate. I'm certified in 5 different BHO machines. Any LPG machines, I know how to operate them, from the Emotech to Precision, you name it. I've run a Waters machine for CO2. This is important information to have so that you can communicate, effectively with your customer, and you know where they come from. If you don't know how it works, how do you regulate it? So everybody I've spoken with, I've given them some information on how to contact me. Excuse me. City of Aurora we learned from you guys, to be honest with you. We watched some of the things that happened to you, and we took our time to develop our program based on the things that we saw that went on in Denver. We put a program together that's pretty robust, and our customers really like us. Let's put it that way. And we like them, and they play well. We put it, I'm done. I'm rambling now. Thank you.
All right, we might be able to time for, if you've got one question.
I'll be very quick. It's not a question, but I'm from UL. And so if anybody's got a question about how any of this goes, I can probably help with some details. And I would say that one of the hindrances up to this point has been lack of a consensus national standard for some of this equipment. And there is a draft UL standard for plant oil extraction equipment out there, 1389. That'll be published in the very near future. So when standards come, I think prices will settle down and we can get to the facts about what it really costs. So, got questions? Yes.
That's great to hear. All right, well, I want to say thank you all for being here, and thank you to my extraordinary panel for sharing all of your information today. Appreciate it.